Kia ora, ready to start back again, everyone? Okay, we're on item number 9. I just want to make an announcement. We're not going to have the events forum today because we just don't think this agenda might go on, and we don't know what time that it'll be here, so we're going to postpone that to another day, and another day will come up in our calendars shortly. So just putting that out there so that everyone's not expecting us to hurry to get to the event forum. So just so that everyone knows that right now, it's not going to be on today's schedule. Okay? So let's now move to item number 9 on page 163, and we ask Kathy and Chris, because Hamish is on leave, to come forward. Right, I'll hand that over to you to talk to us about College Street.
Cool.
Thank you. We'll get Chris to take us through this item. Thank you.
Greetings, Council. I'll take the report as read, but in summary, in response to the concerns with the intersection of Botanical Road and College Street, there's been some concerns raised about right-turning vehicles and active transport through the intersection. Council officers have undertaken transport modelling of the intersection to test a number of scenarios, which includes dedicated right-turn phases and cycle phases on approach to the intersection.
Chris, sorry, can you just bring your microphone a little bit further forward, just so that we can clearly hear what you're saying? Thank you.
Apologies.
I'm a little bit deaf today, so I can't hear very well, so thank you for that.
No, apologies. From the council reports, from the reports we got from consultants, any potential change that we make to the intersection will result in increased delays and queue lengths at the intersection during peak times. Today we are asking council to provide direction on the decision to fund treatments and the timing of them. Officer's recommendation is option 1. This is for council to consider funding in the 23-24 annual budget to install dedicated right-turn phases at the intersection to address immediate safety concerns with vehicles turning right. Additionally, the recommendation is to defer cycling phases as part of the, to be considered in the 2024-34 long-term plan process. The reason for deferring the cycleway phasing is that the cycling elements should actually be considered as part of the Botanical Road cycleway corridor rather than as an individual element. We are now happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I'll just do one question from me. So with option 1, the cost is 120,000, but we get no funding from Waka Kotahi.
Yes, essentially this project hasn't been flagged to Wakatahi in the long-term, in the lead up to this long-term plan, so we haven't been able to apply for get approvals for an upgrade.
So this has been prioritised ahead of other projects?
So that what this option would involve is council funding the 120 and enabling us to include within a process for with Waka Kotahi funding for the balance the cycleway piece, because we will be owing into a new business case phase with Waka Kotahi. So if council was not of the mind to fund the 120 next year, then we could potentially include that in the business case and seek Waka Kotahi contribution if it was part of the long-term plan.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Chris and Kathy. So my first question is, and I've just got a number of questions here. With the proposal option 1, what would be the challenge of retrofitting the cycleways cost and space, please?
So with the cycleway, to introduce right-turn phases, you need to separate the cycleway. I guess we don't know how we want to deliver the Botanical Road cycleway. There's a number of various options where you consider one-way cycleways on each side of the road or bi-directional on one side of the road. So it completely changes the layout in terms of the traffic lanes and the infrastructure, or most of the infrastructure.
Okay. So potentially, we could in fact be shelling out $120,000, but then actually be in for a greater cost if we were then to try and retrofit the cycle lane?
I think it would be fair to say that there may be the potential for rework depending on the cycle lane option chosen. However, by funding the 120 ahead of time, you are addressing some of the immediate safety concerns rather than delaying addressing all of those safety concerns until the LTP.
Okay, so that, yeah, thank you, Kathy. That brings me on to my next question, really, is this intersection is actually not listed as a high priority intersection at this present time. How many other intersections do we have around the city that actually rank higher than this one?
Based on my assessment of the crash, NZTA's crash analysis system, there's probably about 28 intersections with worse crash statistics over the last 5 years.
And are those intersections, will they be funded in the next annual budget, or how are we going to fund the resolutions for those intersections?
A number of improvements are being planned through, in discussion with Wakatahi and their Road to Zero program. So a number of them have been identified for treatment, and they have, I guess we've been signalled by Wakatahi that they have a higher likelihood of being funded. We can include this project in that, I guess, same bucket. It just depends on how we rank it against every other project, whether council wants to commit this as a priority over other ones.
I think it would also be fair to say that just because an intersection is a higher priority doesn't mean that in terms of a work package we would proceed with it next. Because there are other improvements that occur across the network, it often makes sense to bundle things together or to not do something because there's a developer or something else that we know that's going to occur. So the ranking is the first cut, but then we need to consider what else is happening in the network alongside that before we finalise a list with Waka Kotahi.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, this intersection is, and this is a question, it's not a critical priority in terms of the numbers of accidents. Would that be a fair assessment?
Correct.
Thank you. And just in terms of, if we did everything, right, if we added in the lanes, added in the cycle lanes, and realigned the signals, is my reading of the report correct that if we went, and that's option 5, is that wait times could be up to 141 seconds at the intersection, and we are blowing out past 500 metres in terms of queues?
Yes, that's what the consultant report indicates. That's during peak times, so the morning peak. It won't be as bad during the day, but yeah, we could expect it to get that to that point, typically on a weekday.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Chris and Kathy. I'm just checking that my understanding of the safety issue is correct. So is the current safety issue that right-turning traffic doesn't have any priority and so has to wait for oncoming traffic to stop and or not be there, and therefore if people have to wait a long time and miss a couple of light cycles, they might take a risk and cut the light? Is that what the issue is here?
Yes, that's correct. There is no right turn priority for traffic, so they must go in a gap of traffic. And so I guess if people are waiting too long, some drivers may feel impatient and might take a riskier manoeuvre.
Okay. So that was my anecdotal observation. Since that's the sort of cause of the issue, I was a bit confused by the consultant report suggesting that the waiting times would increase with right lane priority, because if we're giving right lane priority, won't that actually speed up the right turns instead of people having to wait until there's a gap?
So I guess in terms of so when you add a new phase to traffic signals, you're essentially dividing up the this whole cycle time. So typically your traffic signals might operate on a 2-minute cycle, and each phase might have 30 seconds if you've got 4 phases. You add in a fifth phase, and so you divide that 120 into 5 parts. And that part might not be enough to get enough traffic to go through it for that particular movement, and it creates queues to form. In some cases, when you have too much queuing, it will block access to the adjacent lanes. So if the straight through lane is too long, no one can get into that right turn lane. So that's how you kind of create additional delays.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Chris. My question is around queues and wait times as well. 28 intersections to be improved. How many years might that translate into for this community?
We haven't done that work, but I guess that there's a range of improvements for a lot of the intersections. Some can, it largely depends on the amount of funding provided.
I think that is the answer, is the amount of money not only that we are willing to put into it, but the amount of money that Waka Kotahi has for this particular part of their government budget towards this will speed up or stretch out the time into which those intersections are all addressed.
Thanks. So in terms of recent history, kind of how many intersections a year have we gotten through?
We've generally planned a couple intersection improvements each year.
I mean, it would be fair to say that the Park Road Cook Street upgrade was quite a significant upgrade and therefore took up more money. And when you looked at the pool, I think in that year we may have only done that and 2 other intersections. So it does depend on the scale. Some improvements at some intersections may be relatively minor in terms of capital cost compared to others.
Great, thank you. That's helpful to understand. If we went with option 3 and just kind of pushed everything out to the long-term plan, would we go just kind of right back to just the crash stats, or how would we reflect and how would we then reflect the community input received to date in any future prioritization effort from an officer's point of view?
If we're going to defer the entire project, I think the funding side of it from Wakatahi is we'd sell it as a walking and cycling project from the Botanical Road corridor. We've already signalled that as part of our master plan, and we've got strong strategic links in terms of other documents and commitments. So funding-wise, I think it has a strong likelihood of getting co-funded. From a safety side of things, it might be a little bit of a harder argument with Wakatahi, but we can still check with them. I'm not sure if that actually answered your question.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get at is for either ourselves or Wakatahi, is weight given to the community voice, or is it simply a numbers, how many people have been injured type of thing?
The Road to Zero part of it is. The community voice is probably more from a direction from council to officers to prioritise.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question might be a bit simple. I feel my brain must be malfunctioning a little bit here trying to understand what's going on. So 4.2 on page 168 talks about allowing a right-hand turn bay and phases to be implemented, but my observation is there already are right-hand turn bays. So are we extending them or doing any work to them, or are we just adding the phase on the light for right-hand turns to be allowed? Is there any actual work to the bay being done?
So no, that's a typo in the report, unfortunately. Okay. It's we're only proposing to do the traffic signal with the lights changes, no changes to the bays themselves.
And so looking at the description of scenarios on page 171, it looks like there's creation of a left-hand turn bay alongside what we currently have compared to the current photos. Is that something we'd be doing, or is that just concept work if we do this? Sorry, 1.1, it
Yep.
looks like there's a forward, a left and a right.
So, yes, so that 1.1, that image shows basically the current conditions. It has assumed that the left lane, which is a combined left and straight, operates as 2 traffic lanes because you can squeeze 2 vehicles in. Sometimes it does operate as 2 lanes, but if drivers don't want to, they can just take up the whole lane. So that image was just to show from a modelling perspective on how they assessed it.
I appreciate it. So we're not suggesting we're going to paint in a left-hand turn lane as well?
No.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that clarification.
Thank you. That's all the questions that you've got. Okay, I'll look to move the recommendations that are on page 163. I'll read them out. That the committee refer an additional capital new program of 120 to the 2023-24 annual budget deliberations to enable the right turn and infrastructure. I'll read it from here, it's a bit easier. And phase change work to be implemented at the College Street Botanical Road intersection, option 1. That the committee refer the cycleway improvements work at the College Street Botanical Road intersection for consideration to the 2024-34 long-term plan, option 3, option 1 process. I'll move that, seconded by Councillor Wood. We'll look for comments, and we've got Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly very happy to support this. The most recent incarnation of this came from submissions through annual budget and those sort of consultations, but this has been a long-standing area of concern for the Awapuni community, very consistent theme going back many, many years. And the reason this has come to us was as a result of council direction to elevate it, to get it out of the situation that we've been trapped in for years, which is that not enough people have died here yet. Well, that's a terrible way to make prioritization decisions, frankly, and when we have a very clear signal from the community about the concerns that they have, about better access to the Awapuni part of the city in general, I think that we should be moving ahead rather than waiting for harm to occur. As we've heard, it is, in the high 20s in the queue, and we're getting through the very low single digits at best if we just keep business as usual. I don't think we should be waiting 10 years for this to happen. It's a relatively small capital cost. Yes, we would need to pick up the portion of it, should we choose to, in the annual budget. Personally, I think that's a good investment and demonstrates the fact that as a council, we are responsive to community. One of the most common criticisms we get, one of the most common themes in the resident surveys and the things that cause us some concern is that council isn't necessarily as responsive to this community as they would like us to be. This is a good example where, thanks to the officers for their action, we're by a whisker able to actually close a loop within 12 months of having a submission, and I think that's actually quite a good position to be in. So I'd urge you to support this so that when we look at that final prioritization and annual budget, we can reach a final decision then. And I think, deferring the cycleway for a broader conversation is a well-argued and sensible approach there. That is obviously me taking a pragmatic view around cycleways because, as you know, more now please is my usual approach there. So very happy to support this, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I am just going to signal that I won't support this. Primarily because it seems to be out of kilter with, I think, a process in terms of how we determined what intersections should actually get treatments and those that need to be put down the order a little bit. I fully understand the issues at this particular intersection, and I certainly heard the voice of the people who made submissions on this. But I think a smarter move really would be to go for option 3 and put it through to the LTP. Primarily because that means that we will actually be dealing with all modes of transport and not just a right-hand turn fix for traffic turning from one road across a lane into another. So the accident statistics Unfortunately, Councillor Barrett is right. At this point in time, compared to other intersections, it just doesn't stack up, and I think we'd be better to move this off into a long-term plan process, and we'll be able to address all modes at the same time, because we've got incomplete cycling networks around the city. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I am going to support the recommendations, and I think it's important that we understand that residents have a route to ask for changes for safety upgrades to their locality. And this particular intersection has been signalled to councillors for very many years. I was just looking back through my emails. The earliest one I found was in 2020, when I had 2 more complaints about the traffic light timing sequence at the junction, specifically the difficulty in turning right from College north into Botanical and right from Botanical into College heading west. Cars waiting too long, cars cutting the lights, an accident waiting to happen. And whilst, I hear Councillor Hancock's concerns, none of this is an exact science. Determining which intersection is a priority over which other one is sometimes a historical look at what accidents have occurred at that intersection. And I think we need to be moving away from the situation where accidents have to occur before we'll consider changes. This is an intersection where the public have signalled to us for years now, through advocating directly to councillors, through bringing submissions to budget processes, that they are concerned about the safety of the junction. And I think that this is a relatively small improvement that can be done relatively quickly to mitigate against the risk of an accident occurring. And I wouldn't like to be in the position, having got to this point, where we vote against this type of safety upgrade, and then subsequently there's an accident. I know that, Waka Kotahi money is attractive, and I know that the thought that there's some kind of scientific process of prioritising is also attractive, because we like to think that then it's not a subjective decision. But it will always be a subjective decision to prioritise one safety improvement over another. And given that the public has repeatedly brought this intersection to our attention, given that there's a school, in fact 2 schools, within about 50 metres of this intersection, I think that it's a timely intervention, and so that's why I'm supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Naylor, online. Sorry, Councillor. Are you ready to go? Go now.
Thank you. I won't be supporting recommendation 1, but happy to support recommendation 2. If the first recommendation fails, I'd be happy to second Councillor Hancock's moving option 3. I think given the benefits outlined on page 165 of option 3, in particular the second bullet point and the 5th bullet point, I did have a question in line for the officers to understand why they hadn't actually recommended option 3 as the recommended option, given the benefits of doing it in a coordinated way with the cycleway, and with the potential benefit of attracting Waka Kotahi funding. I think this is option 3 provides a way for us to respond to the community feedback, but to proceed in a well coordinated and financially prudent way. I think, that doesn't need to mean that it's a long wait. The LTP is beginning just over a year away, so this could still start in year 1 of the LTP late next year. So, but if we can do it in a coordinated way with the cycleway and potentially attract Waka Kotahi funding, I think that's a much more sensible and prudent approach to prevent having to do rework and to prevent for the full burden of the cost falling on the ratepayers.
Thanks, Councillor Naylor. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting this, having lived, well, don't anymore, but lived in Riverdale for a long, long time. I have acute knowledge of how busy that intersection can be. Also, when I attended Awatapu College, vividly remember a lovely young girl a year behind me that died at that intersection. And vividly remember the devastation that caused her family, friends, and the school as a whole. So while I certainly hear that there's a lot of other intersections in Palmerston North that could do with the same treatment, I certainly will be voting for this. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been thinking about whether I'd comment on this, but I think I will make one brief comment. I recognise the concern around prioritisation, and the precedent this theoretically could set is if we had those other 28 intersections come to the chamber with a submission or with a petition saying they'd like us to improve it, then we would have to go through quite a difficult prioritisation process at that point. But the reality is we've had the petition, we've had the mood of the community, and perception to a degree is reality. If people perceive that intersection as dangerous, there will be already people in our community taking, whether it's conscious or subconscious, decisions to avoid that intersection, which artificially reduces crash data in and of itself. So, because I have tried to square this, because I do somewhat agree with Councillor Hancock and Councillor Naylor's argument around how we make these kind of decisions, but ultimately it is about more than just crash data. It's about community perception, it's about community feeling of safety, not just whether it is actually the 29th or 15th most unsafe intersection in our city. It's how people in our community feel. And so I feel the indication we'd be given to our community by not supporting this would be that we care more about a prioritisation protocol than about the actual feelings and needs of people in our community. So I do strongly sympathise with the logic of the argument against this. I think at the end of the day, perception's reality. People do not feel safe at this intersection, and they've asked us to fix it. We have an opportunity to do it, and I don't see why we shouldn't. If it was doing this over the #1 most dangerous intersection in the city, okay, if we were weighing it up in that context, it would be a different story. But we carry on with our intersection improvement programs for the remaining intersections. This is one that we have the ability to make that standout impact for our community. So I will be supporting this.
Okay, that's all the comments. I'll just put my comment in. This is referring it to either the annual budget or the long-term plan. So I think we get sometimes getting our wording muddled up a little bit, but I will support this because I think that's the right thing to do in terms of referring it to the annual budget for a deliberation in the annual budget, and then we can deliberate it again in the annual budget, so we can go around the mulberry bush again. But I do think it's the right thing to do because the community have been to us about this, and it is an intersection that has had our community discuss it with us, so I think it's the right thing to do. But let's now all vote on it. So that's passed with 13 for and was that 1 against? Couldn't see it, went too quick. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, we are going to just change the orders.
Take the second because we separated. We're going to take number 2.
Slightly. We are going to do Vogel Street, and then after Vogel Street we're going to do... Sorry. Sorry, guys. Oh, sorry, we need to take them separately. Sorry, that was number...
We've done number
1, now we're going to do number 2. So can we now vote on number 2? Sorry about that, jumped ahead of myself. passed 13 votes for and none against. Thank you. We are going to do Vogel Street next. Sorry, Hannah.
Someone didn't vote.
Oh. Do we have to redo it, Hannah? Still says the same result. Oh. Has everyone voted? Billy?
We're still missing one.
So stand up, give them a shake.
Online have we got?
Yeah, that's been done. Okay, we'll just do it on the hands, please.
Okay, we're all going to do it on the hands. So that's passed 14 votes for. We're going to do Vogel Street and then we're going to do item number 12 and then item number 11. Okay? Thank you, Kathy and Chris.
Thank you. We'll take the report as read in the interest of time. Just in comparison to the earlier report, this we're asking for a different, well, presenting a different report here. And the reason being is that whilst there's been a strong petition from Vogel Street that we've looked to address, the two options that have been prepared do have an impact on the reallocation of the corridor, and they're quite different impacts on different traffic modes. And really, we need to, in order for council to make a decision, we need more information, and that information is in the form of basically the community came to council with a problem, we've got some solutions, those solutions have different impacts on different people who may be affected, and therefore the next stage for us is to get that feedback from the community, because there will be compromises, and the report is quite clear that there will be compromises, to be able to feed that information before we can come back to you with a recommendation on a way forward. I'll just ask if Chris has got any other information, otherwise we'll take questions.
I guess there's several different treatments as well as part of the options. I guess our recommendation is that you consider the treatments as a whole, as a singular project, rather than delivering the treatments as individual elements. This would pretty much avoid any potential rework or the preclusions of any of the other elements that are delivered later. Other than that, I think we're okay.
Okay, just a first question from me. How are you going to get this feedback from the community?
So we'll be working with our comms team on this, and we'll be developing an engagement plan. But essentially, we'll be doing some of our standard engagement techniques like letter drops, drop-in sessions, social media, work with key stakeholder groups, website, and talk with the media. So yeah, we'll be looking to do quite a wide package in terms of engagement.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Chris. Just wanted to ask what advice you might have around taking an approach similar to what we've just done with College Street, which would be kind of peeling out, at least to my perception, the less contentious pedestrian and right-hand turn bay, and allowing the cycleway conversation to percolate at a different pace.
So I'll answer the first part of that. I'm sure Chris, with his technical knowledge, will add in some things. So in the report, it clearly identifies that raised pedestrian crossings will increase noise within the street environment. And that noise won't just be the people who are next to those raised pedestrian crossings, but it will carry, and that will be the trucks or vehicles braking and stopping. So there's a consultation piece there that we haven't had with the properties who are immediately adjacent to them, who will also lose parking spaces. So to proceed at this stage with installing a raised pedestrian crossing without having done that engagement and without considering those impacts and where those might be would not be a wise decision for council to make, because we don't fully understand the impacts in those low-closed areas. I've asked Chris to address the question of the right turning bay at Featherston.
So where we've located the right turning bay, we've also located one of the pedestrian crossings, so we'd need to design those two elements together. In terms of the cycleway options, that might also have an impact on the pedestrian crossings, on how they're also designed, particularly if it was a separated cycleway. If it's a shared path type design, then there probably is not as much rework with the crossings. But yeah, it comes down to which option the community wants and which option the council chooses to progress with will determine the amount of rework if we were to do them as individual elements. Ideally, you'd do the whole thing in one kind of corridor type project.
Sorry, the only other piece I wanted to add with that is that the design of the raised pedestrian crossings, so to go through a design process, a procurement process and a delivery process, we wouldn't be able to complete that within the next financial year.
Great, thank you. That got my next question off the list. Advice around kind of linking the cycleway discussion of Vogel Street with the final phase of Featherston, the Ruahine to Vogel part. Is the view to kind of keep those quite separate conversations, or is there a potential to bring those together?
There's potential to bring them together. I think once we have a better idea of what Featherston Street is doing with the community workshops, we would try and tie that design into what we look at on Vogel Street. We'll try and take a connected approach and make sure that that it all kind of works.
Great, thank you both. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question probably for the benefit of those councillors who weren't around the table when this petition was received. It just says that there was a petition around road safety concerns. I'd like to understand what those were. Was that purely the right turn bay and the pedestrian crossings, or did that include the cycleways as well?
There was a number of elements in the petition. One was just the sheer volume of vehicles, but probably the primary concern was the trucks using Vogel Street, and you can see in this report just how often those trucks are going down there, so using that as a secondary route. And what that created in terms of the more vulnerable users, mainly being pedestrians and cyclists in that environment. There was also concerns raised about the noise. So there were a number of elements to it, but it really relied around the type and volume.
Okay, so they didn't ask for one specific thing there. They didn't just say, we just want pedestrian crossings, or we just want this, that, or the other. We've come to the safety conclusions of these as being the three aspects that need to be dealt with.
So my understanding of the petition is they did mention pedestrian crossings, they did mention provisions for cycling and right turning.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ngā mihi kia koroa. I've had a handful of residents and road users for Vogel Street suggest a roundabout rather than right turn bay at Featherston Street. I was just wondering if a roundabout had been considered, and if so, what were the cons of that?
We haven't particularly looked at the roundabout option. In general, it requires quite a large space to construct, so my concern would be that it would require property acquisition as a result. Roundabouts aren't particularly great from a pedestrian or cycling point of view. It's great for motor vehicles to go around and there are safety improvements for motor vehicles. But yeah, and traffic flow. But yeah, the pedestrian cycling element makes it quite difficult. And then in terms of the cost would be, I would estimate, within the $1 to $2 million mark as well, in terms of if you were to consider one.
So quite a much bigger undertaking.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. That's all the questions that we've got. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to move this recommendation, seconded by Councillor Wood, to note that the public engagement will be undertaken to seek community feedback on Vogel Street's safety improvement packages. In the queue, we've got Councillor Johnson, then Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm pleased that we're taking this approach with this particular street, that, you know, community has highlighted to us a variety of issues around traffic on Vogel Street. A lot of it has been around heavy vehicle use of Vogel Street, but around speed of traffic and around pedestrian safety. And, you know, as with any changes to a street, they're going to impact primarily on the residents of that street. So I think it's very sensible that we take the approach where we develop a possible kind of menu of changes and go out to a community and say, well, we could do this, but the downside would be that, or we could do this, but the downside would be that, and actually get the feedback rather than, as we have done in the past, which is kind of go out with our best option and then find that that's not what people want. So I think that this is you know, I like the kaupapa of the engagement first before we then come up with hopefully a suite of changes that people, primarily those living and working on Vogel Street every day, are happy to go along with. So thank you to the officers for this.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, initially I did have some appetite for looking at accelerating parts of this. Quite happy with what we've heard back from officers around a reason for taking a holistic approach here. My encouragement to officers and to ourselves is to think about this quite broadly. We've got the cycleway improvements coming down Featherston and within sight of this intersection by the time those get done. So we've got that final segment from Vogel to Ruahine on Featherston Street to pick up. And just at the top of Vogel Street, we've got the long-awaited Fielding Shared Path coming into our city at some point there. So I think there's actually a really good opportunity to position this conversation with the community around that broader how we move people, not just around the city, but even between the city and Fielding. So I hope that we can bring some of that flavor to this conversation with the community. I expect that when it arrives, it will have its challenges, just looking at what's been laid out by way of options. But clearly it is our chance to speak to and respond to the concerns that were raised through that initial petition. So very pleased to be able to support this to the next stage. Thank you.
And just to summarise, there's no other people in the queue, I just also like to say that I think that going out to the community to get their feedback is a really good idea, and I just think that making sure that we're going with all different means of communication so that we can pick up every part of our community, so it's not just social media, it's every part. So, and putting letterbox drops is a really good idea for that street because it is only one street, so I think that's really good, so we can get everybody involved for their streets so that we can find out what they want to do for this improvement to the street. So well done. So let's look to vote on this suggestion. Thank you. That's passed with 15 votes to nil. We're now going to move to item number 12, so Gabrielle. And that's on page 205.
Kia ora koutou. Councillors, it's my pleasure to present this report to you. I take the report as read with the additional information for the first two items of number 4 on page 220. So for the next steps, I would like to provide a brief update. The Waseda Group Study Program in March 2023 have concluded successfully. We also we also completed the marketing mission to Japan and Vietnam. During our time in Japan, we managed to visit the schools, the affiliated school of Waseda University, and the original plan for them was to send one group of students to Palmerston North this year and see how it goes, but we have brought back good news that they have decided to send another group in July this year. The second good news from the marketing mission to Japan this time was that we secure a meeting with the Hiroshima Prefecture Board of Education, and we are currently in negotiation with them for 2 scholarship places for our Kiwi students, our Palmerston North students, to go and attend an IB high school qualification in Hiroshima Global Academy for 0 tuition fee, and all the students will have to pay for is their boarding fee, and the pastoral care of our students will be looked after by a couple of families in Mihara, our sister city. So that is in negotiation, and the discussion will continue and will be reported in further details in our next 6-monthly report. So I have no further additional information. Happy to take any question. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Have we got any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Gabrielle. Vietnam, who went to Vietnam?
So Kate Herridge, our International Relations and Education Advisor, went to Vietnam to attend a couple of Education New Zealand events in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. During her time in Vietnam, she also teamed up with Massey University to visit a few agents and schools in both Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City.
So that was a trip through Education New Zealand, was it?
It is a project funded by Education New Zealand.
Okay, thank you.
You've got off very easy. There's no further questions. Thank you very much. Right, we'll move the report that the committee note the progress on the international relations and education activity over the past 6 months, contributing to the economic development plan and innovation and growing city strategy. I'll move that, seconded by William. Thank you. Great. Moving into comment. Thank you, the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just the depth and breadth of the report sort of gives an indication that we've landed back again, and certainly within schools and tertiary organisations. A number of you have been at different events and would have seen the international faces back again, and good to see Massey. In fact, just the other day, I had just a visitor just appear at my doorway, and he was a young Japanese student that was just walking down our street. Probably went to Councillor Bowen's, but nobody was home. But literally came and just knocked on the door. He had no idea who I was. And I said, "Oh, where are you from?" And it was, he was doing a economic degree with Massey. So, yeah, I don't know why he walked up a driveway, but anyway. But it was just an interesting anecdote there that the students have started arriving back, and we had over 3,000 before COVID, so it's been a long time, and it's been, for some of our organisations, they've felt the pain of not having students back again. IPU, been a long road for them because they are purely or very, very heavily weighted towards international, and great to see Pōwhiri happening in a couple of weeks where a large contingent will come back. But it's just not students. I mean, we've seen the business connections with Israel and Vietnam, and some of those nations are a lot closer too than perhaps some of the more further afar nations. But it also links to some of our institutions and some of our events and Festival of Cultures. There's a couple of images there, which I think is fantastic to see the Diplomatic Corps still supporting us, and our international program goes a long way towards enticing them to come here. So thank you, and thanks to the officers for their hard work in the background.
Thank you very much for a very good report. Thank you, and all your work you do. So we'll look to vote. That's passed with 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. We'll move now to item number 11. On page 183. Thank you, Stacey.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'll keep it rather brief in the interest of time. I just want to make a quick comment about the new report that's been provided to you this quarter. So this is a report that's being produced in-house, and with the attempt really to make the information really relevant to Palmerston North City and to provide a narrative, basically the so what, on why this matters for our community. The additional report that is provided today is a retail report that is prepared by my colleague Kian Lee, and this one is provided to our bid here in Palmerston North to give them a really in-depth understanding of what's happening in our retail markets. With current economic conditions, it's really important to understand the effects on our retail sector, as this gives us a good indication of where the parts of our economy that are under pressure at the moment. So I thought this was important information to provide to you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. You were very brief. Okay, it's opened up for questions. I think everybody's just about gone to sleep. Councillor Barrett, you're first up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just alive and awake and well in this corner. Thanks, Stacey. Just, I guess along that line of introducing this kind of new data sets and new kind of reporting, is that continuing to evolve beyond this, or is this kind of the new standard?
Definitely evolving. So what we want to get away from is mechanistic type reporting. We want to highlight the aspects of the economic conditions and other factors that influence economic conditions specifically. So in terms of climate change, for example, this is something I'm working with some officers on at the moment. There are some questions around the method of calculation that we're just trying to iron out before we bring that back to you. But yes, it's definitely evolving.
Thank you. And scope for enriching the report with more trend analysis as well? I mean, there's some trend data in there, but just kind of what you're thinking around, I guess, the relative value of trend analysis and whether more of that might be brought in?
Yes, absolutely. I'm very much in favour of trend analysis, because sometimes we look at short-term trends and we think, or we overstate the influence or the impact of that. But if we look at the longer trend, we can see that actually by historical standards, it's actually quite positive. So I'm very much in favour of the trend analysis. It is always a balance for me in terms of the amount of information that we have available to us, which is a huge amount, of providing information that's meaningful. But if there is anything in particular that councillors are interested in, certainly we can have a look at that and bring that back in further reporting series.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you. The Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Stacey. As always, a pretty thorough report. Just on 2.9 per capita GDP, and that's the city, is it? 67, or nearly 68,000?
That is correct, yes.
So it doesn't include the district, it's the city?
No, it does not include the district. It is specifically the city.
Do we collect any Because when you Google, you get all these different stats come at you, and there's a mean salary stat for the city. Do we collect any of that data?
We do have access to that data, yes. So I can bring that back in future reporting series if that's something that you're particularly interested in.
Well, it paints an interesting picture, I believe, because it has some higher stats for us as a city because of the more higher earning jobs, even above Tauranga and Dunedin. I just wonder if it's worth pulling that out as well. But I'm glad that that doesn't include everybody, because if you look at the regional is actually quite low. And does that include sort of everybody from the mountain down to...
Are you referring to the GDP per capita
Yeah.
numbers? Because the Manawatu district in particular, no, it's actually just the Manawatu district.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they have a much higher dependency ratio, which is the number of people under 15 and over 65 relative to the working population. So
Gotcha.
that does drag that GDP per capita down.
Quite good to know that the pinch points. That's why I think the mean salary data is equally as important as well.
Absolutely. I'll make a note of that.
Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That just sparked a question. When we say that figures the city, does that include Bunnythorpe, Ashurst, Longburn and Linton, or is that just Palmerston North City itself?
It is the full territorial authority area, so within the boundaries of the territorial authority. So yes, it does include those areas.
Thank you for that. And just one small question on page 201. It talks about the cardholder origin of spending in the city. With international, when it says the origin of the cardholder, I'm just trying to understand where this statistic comes from. If an international student moved here and was coming here for 3 years and they got a BNZ card, would the origin be Palmerston North or would the origin be international? What would they get tagged as?
If it is consistent with the previous standard, then they would be classed as international for a certain amount of time, and then once, I think it's 4 months, and then it moves over to actual local spending. So, but I will confirm that because I know that the market view criteria has changed as they've evolved through this process, so I will check that and come back to you.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Stacey. Just a couple of questions. On page 192, you note that the demand for public housing has dropped quite considerably. Do you have any insights into why that might be?
We are seeing a bit of an increase in rental supply, which could be driving some of that. We are seeing also international migration to Australia of young families, so that's another thing that could be driving some of that. Certainly I've been talking to people in the mortgage area, the property area, and they've also highlighted that we have people leaving Palmerston North for a short term to go overseas to work, and they're actually renting out their properties. So this is a trend that's coming through as well, which I didn't actually think of previously. But part of it will be landlords actually renting their properties for income now that capital gains have fallen away as well. So we have a higher supply of properties available to the rental markets.
Okay, thank you. And then a bit further on the same page, you've commented on the, effects of the OCR influences and so on, but we don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, we don't seem to be seeing any impacts of that yet in our local economy, or are you seeing some impacts of that?
Yes, I think we are,
Okay.
actually. I think
So-
in terms of businesses, households and organisations such as our own, it's certainly having an impact, the higher borrowing costs. I will note that this report was completed prior to the latest OCR increase of 50 basis points, which I think took everyone by surprise, very much so. I will say that banks have largely priced that in, so haven't moved as such on the latest OCR round, which is promising to see. It's always a balancing act, the OCR, because the Reserve Bank is trying to signal to the markets to not lower longer term interest rates, and that's I think the whole reason why they actually pushed up the OCR by 50 basis points last week, because some of the banks were actually decreasing the 1 and 2 year rates, and that's increasing the money supply and demand in the market. So So yeah, but definitely we're seeing those impacts of higher borrowing costs, higher material costs, higher labour costs flowing through. In the NZIER, the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research report, the latest one, actually the biggest concern for businesses at the moment is actually a lack of sales. So that we're seeing that falling demand from higher prices and falling disposable incomes flowing through.
Okay, so what would be the chief indicators for us to watch in this report to see the impact of that then?
Definitely retail sales.
Right, okay.
And we're seeing it come through in the fall in discretionary spending, especially over the 3 months to February. So that's a very clear indication that although core spending is holding up in terms of the inflation rate, the discretionary spending is definitely falling away. And also the housing market, but we've been seeing that for the last year or so.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Stacey, I'll just ask a question from me. On page 198, when you look at that top graph, you've got rest of Palmerston North inner CBD and Palmerston North outer CBD. How do we define inner and outer CBD?
That is included in the categories for the report. I'll just take a look and see if it's written in here, otherwise I can provide the exact classification of those areas to you.
You can do it offline.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Stacey.
Thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for your report, Stacey. One of the things that came out of the Māori Housing Conference in Rotorua was the drop in public housing register. Some of the providers around the country reported that that was because people preferred to move out of what they considered unsafe housing. They were able to move into perhaps a cabin, brand new cabin on a family member's property. Because they'd moved out of the public housing, that took them off the public housing register, but they still have insecure housing, if you know what I mean, because it was just a better temporary location for them at the time. And Shamabio Aquab was going to do some work around that to try and grab that data, just to give a clearer picture, because that data tells us that, you know, it's reduced because people have found
Sorry,
housing.
Councillor, I've got a question.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So, sorry, the question was, this data has come from where, Stacey?
This is the MSD data that they hold on the public housing register.
Cool.
And that's really interesting insight.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Right, okay, Councillor Barrett, back to you.
Thanks for the second opportunity, Madam Chair. Just prompted by the Mayor's question around data availability, do we also have median salary information available as well as mean?
Yes, we do. And I think that's sometimes the issue when we use averages and medians, that we're not looking at the range. It's actually quite difficult to get information on the range. But we are seeing very strong increase in hourly earnings in particular across the city, about 14% year on year. So that just shows the pressure in terms of labour costs.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Right, I think we've gone through all the questions, Stacey. Thank you very much. So we'll go back to the recommendation. On page 183, so happy to move that. Seconded by Councillor Wood, that the committee receive the following report for information. A Palmerston North Quarterly Update, March 23, and the Palmerston North Electronic Card Spending Report, December quarter 2022. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Wood. Just want to comment first. I think that the retail electronic card spending report is absolutely brilliant, Stacey, and you've done a really great job of it, and it looks absolutely amazing. So well done on what you've put together. It's really, really good. So thank you very much. It's very clear, very concise. He pointed out that inner and outer CBD, so I know where that is now. But thank you very much. I think you've done a fantastic job. It's a very, very concise report, so thank you for that. I'll hand over to the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree. A great report. Thank you, Stacey. It's the new layout. I think less is best is always good in these things. But I especially like page 193, which gives you I suppose, a snapshot, an economic snapshot of the main indicators. The period, obviously, Palmerston North, and maybe that could be bolded so it does stand out a little bit more in the stats, but then New Zealand as a whole. And it is interesting to see how we're holding up compared to the rest of the country and the national average. Like Councillor Hapeta, the electronic spending is quite critical. Although this is December, to the end of December, we just have to be a little bit aware, as I've said in this chamber before, I think there's two economies going on, certainly in the retail sense, where maybe the small to medium retailers are really struggling at the moment, and I fear for them in the next year, whether they'll even exist, whereas some of the bigger chain stores and the plazas and the like malls can actually buffer it because of their scale and size. We have to be wary of that, and certainly as we're trying to improve the city centre and make it more attractive, we've also got to have people that are doing business in the middle of town as well. So it's, yeah, again, thank you, Stacey, for it. It's just something we need to keep our eye on, probably more so than normal. Thank you.
Thank you. No more comments. We'll look to vote. So that's passed unanimously. Thank you for that. So we'll move to item number 13. So I'll look to you, Mr Murphy, if there's anything you'd like to comment on the work schedule.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one comment. Item 9, the Te Uu Tanganui Central New Zealand Distribution Hub Master Plan, that was down to come to April. The work on that is very well advanced. We just decided to push that out to June to take the opportunity to connect one more time with the refreshed Te Uu Tanganui governance group prior to that master plan coming to the committee. So that's the only comment I have.
Okay. Councillor Wood?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. Palmy Bid have expressed a willingness to me to report to this committee and present to us. Do we need to add that into our work schedule to receive a report like that or not? No? All right. Thank you.
Okay. I'll look to move the work schedule, seconded by Councillor Zabellin. Did I get it? Thank you. Right. Any comments? No comments. We will look to vote. That's passed unanimously, and we'll close our meeting with a karakia. Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald.
With pleasure, Madam Chair. Kia ora tātou anō. Me karakia tātou. Tū taua mai I runga, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumie, huie, tāiki. Madam Chair.
Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.